medication is critical for teenagers because their hormones are going bonkers anyway. Add ADHD into it, they're double bonkers, and their risk-taking, thrill-seeking, impulsivity, and not thinking of the consequences is off the scale. So you need to medicate teenagers whatever it takes. You know, I've known parents who said, well, I shouldn't really slip it into a cereal without him knowing, should I? I'm like, yes.
Hi, it's Kate from ADHDkidscanthrive.com. Before we start, I want to address the fact that I know how overwhelming it can feel to parent a child with ADHD. That's why I want to share my journey with you through my book, How We Roll, A Parent's Journey on Raising a Child with ADHD. All my experiences, insights are narrowed down into this book. To help you get started, I've made the first 3 chapters of the book available to you for free. You can check out through the link in the show notes below. Hi, it's Kate Brownfield from ADHDkidscanthrive.com. I'm your host of the ADHD Kids Can Thrive podcast. I'm an ADHD parent coach and author as well. Okay, let's get started. I am honored today to be joined by Sarah Templeton. She's an ADHD therapist, author, and advocate based in the UK. Her latest book is out now, which is called How Not to Damage Your ADHD Adolescent. Sarah is also on the APPG for ADHD at the Houses of Parliament and has vowed to be the voice for tens of thousands of young offenders and adult offenders with undiagnosed ADHD who can't get the help they need and get out of that pipeline to prison situation. So she has lots to say. It's been a pleasure for her to join me on this podcast. Please enjoy our conversation. Hi, Sarah. Thank you for being here. I am very much looking forward to this conversation with you today.
Excellent. Thank you for having me.
You are so welcome. Sarah, you do a lot of advocacy for ADHD kids and adults, right, who are really struggling with their ADHD in society.
Yes.
It's really showing. And you are the advocate. And you talk about kind of the dark side of ADHD and why it is so important to take action as soon as you realize you do have ADHD. So let's get into it. So if you could just tell us a little bit about kind of what your work is, where your passion is in your advocacy, and how that all ties. You have a new book, which I love.
Yeah.
The title of your
book. A new one. I've got 2 old ones and another one coming out in April. So in a nutshell, I trained to be a counsellor when I was 49. And a couple of years after that, I was diagnosed with ADHD when I was 51. And I was shocked to the core because nobody had ever asked me or mentioned it ever once in my life if I was ADHD. Didn't believe I was, thought ADHD was naughty little boys chucking chairs at teachers. Didn't know it applied to 51-year-old counsellors, but apparently it did. So I was diagnosed. And at the time I was working in the prisons. And I'd worked in total 4 prisons, 2 adult male prisons and 2 young offender institutes. And I'd always got on incredibly well with offenders. I used to describe it as like magic. We just used to seem to gel instantly. And when I was diagnosed, I suddenly thought, oh my God, half of these boys have been telling me they've been diagnosed ADHD as children. And the other half, I'm now I'd gone through all my own traits and literally researched when I first found out I'd got it. I suddenly realized all these boys in prison, I think they're all ADHD. So I then became passionate about finding out. I went back to some of my old prisons, got the boys that were out. I managed to get them diagnosed. I sat and chatted to them and said, do you have a busy brain? Do you have this? Do you have that? Do you have the other? And they all said yes. So I managed to get all my old clients diagnosed ADHD. And then I left the prison service at the end of 2015. And my goal then was to raise awareness of ADHD in the prisons. And it's taken, honestly, the best part of 10 years. It's only in the last 18 months, I would say, that we've managed to get people to accept that natural ADHD traits that we are born with, we don't choose them, they are part of our DNA, get people into trouble. Just as many people get into trouble as make huge successes out of themselves. So there's, I'm the first to say that there are numerous politicians, sports stars, entrepreneurs, singers, actors, very, 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 very high profile, successful people who are ADHD. Absolutely there are. And then right at the other end of the scale, the prisons are full of ADHD for the same reason, because it's all the same traits that either make you extremely successful or get into trouble.
Right.
So, for example,
And what's the difference in how
Well-
those traits are used in
well,
society?
it's that's the killer question. You've come straight in with the killer question. The killer question is or killer answer is usually either awareness, so knowing that you're ADHD at a young age and getting diagnosed, medicated, and then, as I always say, medication kind of medicates away the rubbish stuff, so it medicates away the anxiety, the overthinking, the ruminating, that sort of stuff, and it leaves you with the good stuff, which is the being driven, not liking boredom, always wanting things your own way, lots of things, having more compassion than other people. So it leaves you with the good stuff. So either getting recognized young keeps people out of prison and keeps them on the right path, or you're lucky, like me, I had a very, very, very strong background. So I had a very strong-willed mother. She would not have let me nor my brothers get into trouble. We didn't dare skip school, let alone get into trouble, because we would have been absolutely hauled over the coals for it. We didn't smoke, we didn't drink, we didn't go out with boys, we didn't do anything because my mother was very, very firm with us. So I think the honest answer to your question is you either come from a very strong family strong's probably the wrong word. I don't know what the right word is. A family that really supports you and pushes you and drives you. For example, my mother made me do my homework. There was no question I wasn't doing my homework every night. My homework had to be done before I had my tea, Now, the boys in prison, you ask them, do they have to do their homework before the tea? They'll say, what homework? Never did it. Because nobody was making them do the homework. Nobody was making them go to school even. Nobody was making them go to bed at a certain time. So they would be, awake at 8 o'clock the next morning to go to school. So you either come from a family that pushes you and keeps you away from the drugs, keeps you away from the very dangerous risk-taking and thrill-seeking. I still did. I was lucky. I was very into drama. So I got all my thrills and my risk-taking and my look at me from being on stage and acting and being very good at comedy. So I used to do loads and loads of comedy. I was in every school play. I went to every drama group I possibly could from a young age. And I got rid of my excess energy and got my attention and my look at me. Aren't I clever? Aren't I the best at this? Aren't I brilliant? I got all that from my acting, and I was good. Other kids get it from sport. They will be brilliant at certain sports. As a counselor, I've worked with kids who are literally top-notch golfers, tennis players, footballers, rugby players. So they will get their, use all their energy and their hyperactivity and their drive and their need to win. They will get that through sports. That's really, really common. Other people don't get it from such good places. So if they haven't got parents that are taking them to tennis clubs, my mum did. She sent me to a tennis academy, and then I was in the school netball team all 4 years of my senior school. So I was getting some of mine from sport and the rest of it I was getting from creativity and drama. Other ADHD kids who don't have parents, who make them go to school, make them do the homework, take them to after school clubs or clubs that they're going to be interested in, that's where things can potentially go wrong. Not always, but sometimes. Because if you've got an ADHD teenager, and ADHD teenagers are my big, big, big passion.
Yeah. Okay. So let's hit your book. Your new book is How Not to Damage Your Adolescent.
Yes.
Which is, I love that title.
In both senses of the word, damage as in you're a naughty boy, I'm going to slap you and keep you down, but also how not to damage them emotionally and self-esteem wise. Because something a lot of people don't realize about ADHD is we always have a lower sense of self-esteem in some respects or a lot of respects. And that's largely because we hear a lot of negative messages as we're growing up. So we're constantly hearing, stop shuffling, stop talking, stop interrupting, sit still, stop mind work, stop biting your nails, stop sucking your hair, stop. We're always doing something wrong. So we end up with quite low self-esteem. And teenagers, by the time they get to their teenage years, another big passion of mine, along with these teenagers, is undiagnosed comorbidities. Now, you probably know what the word I hate that word because it makes me think of dead people. But
I call them friends. Friends.
Yes.
Friends of
Coexisting
ADHD.
conditions.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Friends. Yeah, coexisting conditions. Now, I don't know about America. In the UK, we are hopeless with these coexisting conditions. If you're very, very lucky, your dyslexia will be picked up in school if you've got it. If you're very lucky.
If you're lucky, yeah.
If you're lucky. I had dyscalculia. Not a chance. Mine was picked up in school. Not a chance. They don't screen for that. Pediatricians don't. Psychiatrists don't. Teachers don't think it's their job to do that. So when you get to these teenagers who have got these undiagnosed coexisting conditions, often they can impact their behavior and their performance at school and therefore their self-esteem more than the actual ADHD. So I've worked with a client, for example, who had ADHD was picked up. What wasn't picked up was the autism, was his dyscalculia, was his dysgraphia, and was his dyspraxia. None of those have been picked up. So he's at school at 15. That's when he came to see me as a client. Utterly cheesed off with the whole thing. Going to school for him was a complete waste of time. He didn't know what was going on. He has got a very good mother who made damn sure he went to school. But he felt school was a complete waste of time because he didn't understand it and no one was explaining it to him in a way that he could get. So what happened? He got arrested. Luckily, for nothing too terrible, and because he did have that strong family unit behind him, they managed to get the charges dropped. Took about 2 years. It wasn't easy. And he's now doing extremely well. He's in his early 20s now and he's doing well. But he had that firm mother behind him, even when he got arrested. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And do you talk a little bit about like how impulsiveness plays in this too?
Oh,
Or
massively,
especially with the
massively.
adolescent? Yeah.
Yeah, massively.
Teenager.
When teenage, I mean, I gave up science at 13, so you'll get the very unscientific explanation from me. But ADHD is at its worst in puberty, and particularly in boys, because of one word, and that one word is testosterone. Because boys have that testosterone flooding through their bodies from the age of anything from 9 to 12 onwards, it can make them angry. It can make them frustrated. It can give them attitude. It can really make them more than angry. It can make them enraged. It can make them absolutely
Turning them into men, right? They're trying to be men.
When it's out of control, when they don't know they've got ADHD and suddenly they've got this flood of emotions and strong emotions, if they're not diagnosed, not medicated, these are going to be flooding their body completely. And they are going to feel like punching people or punching walls or punching a car or whatever. Very soon that gets them, involved with the criminal justice system. With girls, mostly, not always, but mostly, ours comes out in attitude. We get rude. I was always told from the age of 12, you've got a dreadful attitude. And I was like, really? I didn't know my attitude was any different. I didn't know I'd changed. It wasn't purposeful. It was the fact that I'd got these hormones now racing around my body. And apparently from the age of 12, I was extremely rude. And I outgrew it by about, I would say, 18, 19, when I started to work in London and I was around other adults, but we don't know. If you don't know your ADHD and suddenly got this flood of emotions hitting you, it will come out in all sorts of different ways. And as I say, the good ways are through sport, entertainment, acting, dancing, singing, whatever, some sort of creative activity or sports. But it's the kids who don't have that in their life that tend to think, well, there's a building site there. I'll just go and climb on that scaffolding. That'll be fun. And then before you know it, they're in trouble.
Yeah.
It's I hate to sort of say it's down to the parents, but largely it is, and a lot of parents say to me, yes, but the parents are ADHD as well. It's very difficult for us to organize ourselves. I get that. I get that most of the parents are ADHD as well. So saying, take your child to activities every day after school, they're like, oh my God, how am I going to manage that? I can't even get myself dressed. So I get it. But ultimately, with everything I've seen in the prisons, and I've worked with private clients on the outside, parenting plays a huge part, which is why I write my books for parents. Because when I was going to write one for teenagers, I asked a lot of my teenage clients, who I was still seeing clients at that time, and I said, look, I'm going to write a book for teenagers. They all said, don't bother. We won't read it. Don't, just don't bother. Thanks. Bless you. But just don't. And I said, okay. I said, I'll write it for your parents. And they went, yeah, great idea. Yeah. Would you please explain my brain to my mother? Because she does not get it. So I wrote the book for the parents of ADHD teenagers. I always say ADHD teenagers are a breed of their own. An ADHD 13-year-old couldn't be more different to an ADHD 7-year-old. They are so different. And that's why I've written this one specifically for the parents of teenagers, because this is where it can go very right or very wrong. It's a big old crossroads in their teens, and it's not only, as I said, the undiagnosed coexisting conditions, and largely it's that. It can also be the undiagnosed ADHD, undiagnosed autism sometimes, because we now know ADHD and autism can go together. But where I've seen it go wrong is it's where the coexisting conditions, nobody thinks it's their responsibility to diagnose them. Nobody to this day. Pediatricians will tell you no, psychiatrists will tell you no. The teachers will say no, parents will say no, we don't know enough about it. Teachers don't think it's their job. These two are medical, so they won't diagnose it. So who picks up?
Well, in the US, you can really get diagnosed. You can get diagnosed down to the tiny, tiny piece of you that is to be. Yes, but overall, though, the school and the community isn't going to accommodate all of these diagnoses. Yes, it's really.
Okay, that's interesting.
So you can get diagnosed and you can call it out, but it doesn't mean that your world is going to be modified to meet you where you are at and help you. You really have to, as parents, still advocate. And it's really up on the parents to put the systems in place around the child to help them get through school and maintain their self-esteem. So
I sort of get that, because I have written a book for teachers. When I wrote my very first book, which was for younger children, a lot of the parents were giving it to the children's teachers and saying, this is what he's like, and this is how you handle him. And, if you shout, he is going to go like that because he's probably got sensory processing disorder and things like that. So I wrote the book for teachers, and that has helped a lot of teachers. I mean, teachers say, oh God, we also do a lot of training in schools.
Good.
Every single school we go into, they're like, thank you so much. I mean, one classic example, we had a special education needs teacher who'd been a SENCO, as we call them here, for 20 years. And she came to my training and she said to me, Sarah, I've just learned more in the 2 hours about what ADHD is than I have in 20 years SENCO training.
Yeah.
And that's
okay. That is true here too.
Is it?
Yes, because special ed in that is really not really talking about ADHD. It's really, they're not trained in ADHD and executive functioning and all of that.
Yeah.
I think they got trained on more serious special needs, and ADHD isn't really considered severe special needs. And so there's no training in that or really understanding.
This is where it's so wrong. I'm not saying America's wrong. We're wrong as well. A lot of our SENCOs, maybe let's rewind. Teachers here often get no training in neurodiversity at all. So there was one teacher who qualified in the last couple of years. She herself is ADHD, autistic, and dyslexic. And she said, we had in my whole 3 years, 3 hours of training on different conditions we might find in the classroom. She said 3 hours, even to explain my ADHD, autism, and dyslexia isn't enough. Never mind the rest of it. Never mind. That was just kind of how to identify it, not to work with it, not to how to manage it and get the best out of these kids. That doesn't get included in our teacher training. That's something we're trying to get changed. We want teachers, because when I go into school and I'm training teachers, they are all so grateful. And they're all so thankful. And they're like, oh my God, we just had no idea this is what ADHD really was. Thank you so much. I've had numerous SENCOs saying, thank you. I can now go back and do my job properly. I've not been doing it properly. But now I know what these conditions are. I can now do my job properly. Well, that's not the teacher's fault. That's the training's fault. It's not included in the training.
Yeah.
So that's something we're trying to change here massively.
Okay. So Sarah, tell me more about like the work and the changes that you're trying to do with these kids with ADHD that do get into that prison pipeline, because that is a real risk of having ADHD and not having it called identified and getting educated about it, what it is. It's that ADHD to prison pipeline, right?
Yes, it's horrendous. I mean,
it's a real thing. And I love
ours is packed with ADHD. Absolutely packed.
I'm sure in the United States it's kind of
not to be the same. It's worldwide. I mean, we're doing quite a lot of work now with Australia. Australia have come to us, several police forces. There are 3 states. I think they've got 6, and 3 out of the 6 states have come to us and said, we know we're rammed with ADHD here. I'm actually going to Australia in February and March to talk to a lot of them, because they've realized. But America's my next big one to crack. Beggars, there's a lot of ADHD kids who are not getting the right support, not getting the right diagnosis, and before they know it, getting into trouble with the police. I know. So I know because I watch all the American prison programs. Now I see all these kids. So what the problem is, until you're either diagnosed or hopefully medicated as well, all of these traits are running free, right? So you've got the risk-taking, the thrill-seeking. You've got the low propensity to boredom, or is it high propensity? You get bored very easily.
Yeah.
Boredom. When I was working in the prisons and I used to ask boys, why did you actually do this last crime? 8 out of 10 will say, I was just bored. I needed something to do,
Okay.
I was so bored. That's why they go out and they go on a building site, And then you've got the dopamine chasing, I've known boys who have actually gone up to a police officer and punched him on purpose so that the police officer will chase him and then he gets his adrenaline because he's running away from the police. So they will do daft things and get into trouble. But I've worked with lots of kids who got into trouble. When I came out of the prisons, I was actually beginning to get frustrated in the prisons because I was working with these 18, 19, 20-year-olds. They were all ADHD. They had all done what I call naughty, silly things. Nothing, you're not talking murders, rapes, all of that. Largely daft things, but daft things hundreds of times. And that's when the judges get fed up and go, for goodness sake, you're going to prison for 6 months. So largely they're in there for fighting, getting drunk, causing a fray, throwing a stone and then, whoops, it smashed a window, criminal damage, silly, silly, silly things, but lots of silly things. They just don't stop doing them. So by the time they got to prison, I was thinking, I need to get to these kids earlier because by the time they've been arrested 500 times, some of these boys, and then get sent to prison, their self-esteem plummets. They hate themselves. This is what people don't realize about a lot of the people in prison.
Yeah.
They hate
Okay,
themselves.
now, Sarah, can I just ask you this question? What does drugs and alcohol play into their getting arrested? Is that play a role?
Massive part.
Okay.
Massive part. Yeah. Because people who don't self-medicate it in those healthy ways I was talking about, largely they will self-medicate either with alcohol or drugs. Largely. Yeah.
And that can land them in prison as well.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
I can talk very openly about one case, very openly, because he's a trustee of our charity. He, by the age of 29, had been arrested 500 times, had been sentenced 53 times, and been to prison 16 times by the age of 29.
Yeah.
When I then got him diagnosed and medicated to the charity, he's never offended again. And all his crime was linked to alcohol. So he was self-medicating. What he didn't know was his very severe ADHD with alcohol. So all his crimes were for stealing alcohol, being drunk on alcohol, getting into fights when he was drunk, a fray when he was drunk, ABH and GBH because of alcohol. So as soon as we got him diagnosed and medicated, he stopped drinking and he doesn't offend anymore. Simple as that, So a lot of it is to do with drink and drugs. And this is why, as well as starting to screen for ADHD in police stations, which we've started here, we are also starting to screen in addiction services because they are, again, rammed with undiagnosed ADHD. Yeah.
To bring the mental health piece into the addiction piece.
Yes.
Tie it together. Yeah.
Yes. And I tell you, it's very upsetting when you go. There's an example. We went to a charity quite near here, an addiction charity. There were approximately 20 people in the room and 2 trainers. We worked out, or they worked out themselves from our talk, that every single one of them, except one in that room, was ADHD, including the 2 trainers who had obviously been addicts before and were now working as tutors in this place. A lot of those people ended up in tears because by the time you get to be sitting in an addiction charity getting help, often you've lost your job. You might have lost your partner very often. You've often lost your family. If your mum and dad are just completely exasperated with you and they've been sent to rehab and it hasn't worked because if you haven't identified the ADHD, rehab won't work. It just won't work. Standard rehab courses, and I'm trained in addiction, they'll work beautifully for people who aren't ADHD and they won't touch the sides if you're ADHD. So people end up with very low self-esteem again because they've gone through rehab. Other people have come out clean and they haven't. So there again, your self-esteem plummets. But until you've recognized that the addiction is connected to undiagnosed ADHD, you're not going to get very far. You'll try hard, but you're not going to conquer it until you've actually realized what the root issue is. And it's nearly always ADHD. So when we go to addiction charities, we're very, very, very passionate about addiction charities because ultimately it's life-threatening. A lot of these addictions that people have are life-threatening. And I know an awful lot of people who have died with undiagnosed ADHD and with addiction. It's a life-threatening situation. And this is when, I can't remember what you said earlier, but when people said that it said something about they don't take it seriously. This is when I start to get on my high horse because ADHD is a very, very serious condition.
Yeah.
It's the only one that comes with a 5 times higher risk of suicide. It's the only one that comes with a 15 to 25 year reduced life expectancy. And that is largely due to the connection with addiction. ADHD people do tend to have shorter lives. We also have a much stronger link to cardiovascular problems. My dad died at 52 of a heart attack. His at 44 of a heart attack. And I had a heart attack. Mine was very mild. I was very lucky. I had mine at 49. We die younger because of the ADHD. So
do you think that's due to the stress that ADHD brings onto the body? Yeah.
Yes, I do. I personally, this is not a medical opinion. This is my opinion. ADHD people, especially when you're not diagnosed and medicate, we can get very angry. We can get very het up. Because of our heightened sense of justice, we can get absolutely livid about things and angry, and our blood pressure goes up and our face gets bright red. And, before you know it, we've had some sort of coronary. It's only very recently that I've actually read that officially. That is now, what are they calling it? An official factor of ADHD is cardiovascular problems. I've suspected it for a long time because of my own family, but it's definitely now linked.
Okay, so can I ask, do you take medicine personally?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
And I'm lucky because I did have that very mild heart attack. They started me on non-stimulants. I've tried stimulants and they work beautifully. The perfect medication for me is Adderall, which ironically, I know in America is very easy to get. Not in England. It's a Class B drug here. Not allowed it. So that's the perfect one for me because it's a short acting and the long acting ones affect my sleep. However, I'm on a non-stimulant, which is called atomoxetine Strattera, either name.
Oh, got it. Okay.
Yeah, and it works extremely well for me. I mean, what it stopped for me was it stopped my binge eating, it stopped my road rage, and most importantly, it stopped my chronic ADHD internal motor. I had a dreadful internal motor, which meant I couldn't stop. To me, sitting down was a complete waste of time. I did ironing, washing, hoovering, working, phoning someone. I just couldn't stop. And I used to say to people, I won't relax until I'm dead. Well, what the non-stimulant meds have done for me is allow me to relax. So I can relax now, which is amazing.
Kind of calm. Yeah. But you still have your passion for this.
I still have my passion and I still have my heightened sense of justice. My heightened sense of justice is very high when it comes to offenders because I've worked in 4 prisons and I've worked with hundreds of offenders and every single one of them has been lovely. I mean, I'm not saying that they're not lovely all the time. They've obviously done something to get themselves put in prison. But to me, absolutely lovely.
Yeah, you see the good. You see the good.
Very, very low self-esteem. I always say to people, don't hate the people in prison because they hate themselves enough. They hate themselves way more than you can hate them. And the reason they mainly hate themselves is because they can't stop doing what they're doing. So one example of a boy I worked with, he was 21. And he said to me, he was diagnosed ADHD as a child, but he wasn't on medication. And I met him in a young offender institute. And he said to me, Sarah, I want to be the person I am sitting here talking to you. I know I can be a nice bloke and I can be sensible and, kind and all the rest of it. He said, but I also know if I walk past my mum's handbag and I see her purse, I'm going to whip it. And if I walk past my nan's, I'm going to nick it out my nan's as well. Now, when I was seeing him, I wasn't very ADHD. I wasn't even diagnosed actually when I was seeing him. So I didn't really realize why that was. But now I've said to him, that is your ADHD brain seeking adrenaline. So when it sees a purse or it sees a wallet or it sees cash, whatever, you're not going to be able to say to stop taking it because your brain is screaming at you. That's exciting. Grab it now. Grab it. That's your brain shouting that at you. But that's why a lot of them hate themselves because they can't stop doing this stuff and they don't understand why. Because they are genuinely nice people. But they keep screwing up over and over again.
Okay, so let me ask you, like, so for the one guy who kept getting arrested
Yeah.
and a million times, is that just shows there's no like those flags that are showing up with somebody in our society. We just don't have a system in place to bring them better support than to just
Yeah.
continue to keep arresting them.
Yes.
Right? So is that
Yeah.
part of your advocacy is to
It's massively part of my advocacy, and hopefully we are on the brink of getting some funding, and I pray we get it, because what we're going to do is set up ADHD support groups in all the prisons and all the young offender institutes, and we're also going to have a 1-year annual campaign on national prison radio to try and raise awareness, not just in the prisoners but in the officers, in the mental health teams, because in our prisons they're still very, very hot on diagnosing personality disorders. So an offender with ADHD might give them 2 or 3 personality disorders when actually it's ADHD. So they haven't been trained. This is the problem in the UK. There are psychiatrists and psychologists working in some of our prisons who are brilliant, who understand ADHD and are diagnosing it, but that's not common. Much more common is that they don't understand adult ADHD. They think it's a childhood behavioral disorder that you're going to outgrow in your late teens, and they will slap 1, 2, 3, or 4 personality disorder diagnoses on you instead. And that's what we're having to fight, because it's extremely dangerous. And we have a very high ratio of self-harm and suicide in prisons. And just going back to what you said about the boy who arrested 500 times, when we asked him afterwards, he was a prolific self-harmer, as you know, some ADHD people are. He was a very prolific self-harmer. And he'd been in healthcare, as he said, pretty much every day, having his wounds dressed or, cleaned, everything, really bad wounds. And I said to him, when you were in there, did anybody ever say, mention that this could be due to a condition, undiagnosed condition? Did anybody mention ADHD once ever? He said, no. 16 prison visits, pretty much in healthcare every day. Nobody ever mentioned it to him once. And yet now he's out, diagnosed and medicated. I think we're rocking on for 4 or 5 years now, but he hasn't offended once, because all his offending was due to alcohol, as I said. And now he doesn't drink. No.
And is he taking medicine?
Yes.
For the ADHD?
Yes.
And is he learning to feel better about himself? Like
yes, but it's taking a very long time.
Well, yeah, I'm sure it could be
a question for you to ask about him, because he of everybody, when he was diagnosed, he said, I'm not looking for an excuse. And we said, it's not an excuse. You've done this stuff. We accept you've done this stuff, but there's a reason behind why you've done this stuff. And this is ADHD. It took him, I would say, the best part of a year to start to forgive himself for how he'd been. He had crippling low self-esteem. And when I say, they hate themselves more than we could ever hate them, he's a brilliant example. He thought he was an absolute waste of space, absolutely useless, hopeless, couldn't stick to anything, no willpower, no backbone, whatever you want to call it. And we've very much had to go very gently with him, because he kept on about not looking for an excuse. And we said it never is an excuse, but sometimes it can be the reason. And he now understands his brain. He now understands that his brain was seeking something. Actually, one of his siblings is a heroin addict, and he completely gets that's potentially why his brother is a heroin addict. He said, I was getting it in heroin. He was getting it in alcohol. So we're getting there with him, but it's taking a long time to rebuild that crippled self-esteem, because he'd been getting into trouble with the law. I think he got his first ASBO, which is I can't remember what that stands for now, but it's when they get what they give to naughty kids. He got his first ASBO when he was 13. So he'd been in trouble with the police since 13. And we didn't get him diagnosed ADHD till he was 30, to 29, 30. So that's 17 years of getting it wrong, being told off, feeling like you're rubbish, repeating the same mistakes over and over and over and over again, and feeling just absolutely hopeless that you're no use to the world. Yeah, that's my biggest worry with undiagnosed teenagers, is they can have such a poor impression of themselves that they feel there's just no point. All I'm doing is upsetting people. The police are sick of me. My mother's sick of me. My father's left. My brothers and sisters hate me. And they very quickly can get to the point of, what's the point of even being here? And it's the self-harming and the suicide that concerns me a lot. I lost one of my young offenders last year, the only one I've ever lost. But he was ADHD, in prison, and not on medication. due to, I don't blame the officers for this, I blame the system for this. We need training, ADHD training in the criminal justice system, police, youth offending services, prisons, young offender institutes, all of them. They need to be trained in ADHD and to realize how serious it is. Because in the UK, at least, far too many people still see it as naughty boy syndrome. It's naughty boys kicking off, and actually they should just learn to behave. If they learned to behave, they wouldn't have this.
I would say that's kind of a thing still in the United States too.
Yeah. I mean, it was a thing on the NHS, our National Health Service. It was on their website till about 3 years ago that it was a childhood behavioural disorder that you outgrew in your late teens. We're like, come on, catch up. It's not. We've got, we've had so many adults. I don't know have you ever heard of Rory Bremner? He's a comedian, but he's also takes off other people's voices, whatever that's called. He's very, very good at mimicking, other people's voices. Well, he was diagnosed with ADHD roughly 6 years ago. And he's taken very seriously in England because he's a very good impersonator, as what I was looking for. And he sort of impersonates a lot of politicians. And, he's very, very well thought of as quite an intelligent man. Now, when he was diagnosed, he did a television program called My ADHD and Me. And one of the things he did in that show was get his brain scanned. And they showed that you can actually tell the difference now between a non-ADHD brain and an ADHD brain. Most people, of course, can't afford to go and get their brain scanned to find out whether they're ADHD or not.
Right.
But it's possible. And he showed it. And he wasn't diagnosed. I think he was late 50s, very early 60s. And he showed that it's not a naughty boy behavior. I'm a grown man, quite a successful one. And he was diagnosed. And I think we're catching up in this country. What a lot of our police have also realized is that a lot of the police have got ADHD.
Yes.
Because it's an adrenaline giving, running after people. But then they realized they were running after all the ADHD people. So the police have realized that pretty much everybody they're arresting is ADHD. So we've got some amazing police forces over here, big police forces like Greater Manchester Police, the whole of Police Scotland, Birmingham Police, West Midlands Police, big forces who've all realised, we're arresting lots of ADHD people. And some of these have also got autism. And, they recognise it in them because they're the same. So we've got wonderful, wonderful police forces who have started to screen. And that's why when Australia heard about our police forces that are starting to screen, that's why Australia have been getting in touch with us, because they'd realised the same. That pretty much everybody they're arresting has got either ADHD or autism, very often both. You do get quite a lot of people who've just got autism also being arrested. I've spoken to a lot of sort of autistic societies, and they've said, trust us. There are as many people.
I believe that. It's like a mental health thing, right?
Yeah.
I'm unfortunately
often are very, very good at working things out. So a lot of them are spammers, hackers, that sort of thing, because their brains. My ex-husband was autistic. He used to work for the police, setting their iPads up so that they couldn't be infiltrated by anybody, because his brain worked in such a way that he could see how people would hack or spam a police officer's iPad. So his job was to set up their iPads so they were unpenetrable. So, of course, that will switch very easily into criminal behavior. And a lot of people that get arrested for those very clever crimes where it's hacking and spamming and catfishing and all that sort of stuff, a lot of them are autistic.
Yeah.
So it's that, we use the word neurodiversity to cover all of it. And it's very true. There are, one of the things my charity is doing is we are doing a lot of assessments into prisons. So when boys, men and women cannot get the right diagnosis in prison, somebody is paying for it. So either probation, their solicitor can get legal aid for them, family members pay, partners pay. So we're doing these diagnoses into prison. And what's fascinating with that is that there's only one that we've done where it was just ADHD. All the others, because I always say to the person who contacts me, can you just have a look at adult autism? Or can you just have a look at adult ADHD and just see, because so often these conditions go together. And every assessment we've done, we're doing roughly 3 a week and have done for about a year. Yeah. Only one has just been for ADHD. The rest have all been for ADHD and ASD.
Oh, interesting.
Yes, it's fascinating for me because I didn't think that was the case. I would have thought it was going to be nearly all ADHD. It's not. There's a lot of people that have got combined 2 conditions and are in prison. And they only think they've got one, not the other. But because we're doing them, and I'm trying to give people value for money, I always say if they come to me I had it last week, lady came to me, her son knows he's autistic, wants diagnosing. I said, that's absolutely fine. We can do that. But could you please just Google adult ADHD traits and just see whether any of that resonates? She was back to me within the hour. Definitely. That's him as well. Definitely. So, we're doing a dual diagnosis for him. So
that's great. I think we're learning more about neurodiversity and what it really looks like and how, really what the negative outcomes of that can be if parents aren't getting on board with what's going on with their kid. And the school has a role to play in that a little bit because that's where kids spend a majority of their lives.
Yes.
And we know those symptoms are showing up in the classroom.
Yeah. I agree. I mean, I know there's every opinion on this about whether teachers should say or do anything. I wish my teachers had, I didn't find out till I was nearly 52. I would much rather my teachers at 10 have said, she's very hyperactive and she doesn't shut up. Let's see if there's something going on there. I would much rather have known. So I think teachers, even if you just flag it up to the parents, let's take inattentive ADHD, which is not girls' ADHD, as some people call it, because there are as many boys and men with it as there are women. But inattentive ADHD, if you've got somebody in your class who is constantly distracted, who's always looking out of the window, who's always in their own head, who's away with the fairies, whatever expression you want to call. One of my friends, actually, as an adult, when I met her, she said, my mum just used to call it my butterfly brain. And I said, oh, how lovely is that? My butterfly brain.
Yeah,
never settles on anything. But if you're noticing that in a child, every class I was in, there was always a couple of people that were constantly, lovely people, not a backbone in their body, but couldn't concentrate. Were always looking out the window, all saying, pardon, sorry. My niece was one. My niece has just got diagnosed age 24 with inattentive ADHD. And when we were trying to work out whether she had it, she said, put it this way, Sarah. She said, in my classroom, often I wake up to Izzy, because she's gone somewhere in her head and they're all trying to bring her back into the room, like kicking the fingers, So if a teacher notices that person that's always away with the fairies or in their butterfly brain, yes, mention it to parents and just say, look, I don't know whether this is anything, but it might be worth pointing out. Your daughter does seem to be distracted quite a lot. Just have a little Google around some of the things and talk to her, see what she struggles with, see what she finds interesting or easy. You will find it up if you do a bit of digging, but people don't dig enough. What they do, I don't know. We'll talk about America, but in England, there's still this, everybody's got to behave the same rule. So in class, there's no acceptance, or not all, but most. There's no acceptance of ADHD people, for example, need something to fiddle with. I always have a pen here because if I don't have something to fiddle with, I will at some point get very antsy because I need something to fiddle with. And at school, I used to draw loads and loads of squares and then color them in. Now, that was an indicator of ADHD, but nobody picked that up when I was at school, but they still don't to today. All the child will get told off for is doodling. Put your pen down, concentrate, and it's tiny, reasonable adjustments. I always say tiny, reasonable adjustments can mean the world of difference to an ADHD person. So me just being able to hold this when I need to and talk to you holding my pen, that automatically means I can calm down and focus and talk to you. Take that away from me and my body is already starting. It's starting to fizz. My legs are fizzing right now because I need something to fiddle with. And then once I'm doing that, I can concentrate. So people don't understand this. And a lot of teachers don't in England. So, kids who are shaking their legs, kids who are rocking backwards and forwards on their chair like I used to till I went straight over the back one day and smacked my head on the tiles. Did that at home and at school. Went straight over the back and then stopped rocking from those days onwards. But those are red flags. And red flags should be picked up on because red flags are potentially going to help that child hugely and could be the difference between them achieving massively in life and becoming, let's use one of the famous ones, Cameron Diaz. Cameron Diaz, you could be Cameron Diaz or you could be in a women's prison. Which would you rather be? It's almost that choice because ADHD people don't very often walk the middle line. I always say we're out there achieving, we're very compassionate, we're paramedics, we're ambulance drivers, we're doctors. We are counselors. I mean, my counseling world's full of ADHD. We're out there with all the compassion, caring, or we're very, very famous and we've achieved hugely in sports, entrepreneurship, acting, dancing, singing, pop music, whatever, or we're in prison. And there's not a great deal in between. We're one or the other, there's really not a great deal in between. So people either find what their passion is and what their drive is. I always say to ADHD people, you don't need to be good at everything. We never are. But the thing that we love, I love helping people. I know it sounds like a cliche, but I do. I love helping people. I always have done since I was little. And that's why I trained to be a counselor. And that's why I do what I do now, because I just love helping people. And I love helping people. The people I love helping most are the ones who need it most. So in this country, that is most definitely offenders, because they get very little. When we're chucking out the money in this country, we're chucking it out to, old people first. When we're chucking out to people with disabilities, people who are deaf, people who are blind, then we're chucking it at children, then we're chucking it at families. Where are we chucking it at offenders? They are so far down the list, but when money goes to prisons or probation or whatever, they're the ones that are really suffering. All our prisons are overcrowded. The prison officers are all cheesed off because they've got too much work, because everyone's resigning or going off sick because they can't cope with the amount of people in the prisons. The whole thing is a disaster, basically, a total disaster. And I'm most passionate about the prisoners, primarily because I've worked in 4, and I've worked with ex-offenders on the outside for knocking on 30 years now. And I've met the odd one amongst those who I would call like a really bad person or an evil person, shall we say. Sometimes I think possibly a psychopath. I'm not sure. But 99.9%, absolutely lovely people.
Yes. Okay, Sarah, you're an angel here on earth advocating for the people who need probably the most advocating.
Because they're very nice people.
Yeah. So I thank you for that. I do want to ask you as we wrap up, you've said a ton, but what would be your words of wisdom for parents who are kind of navigating these teenage years? What's the one little nugget to leave everybody with?
It would be the same nugget that I gave to a lady on the phone this morning who's got a 13-year-old who last night was in a police station because he'd done some naughty things. And I said, first question, is he on medication? She said, well, he was, but he's come off. I said, get him back on. Bribe him if necessary. I don't agree with bribery, but teenagers, yes. If it has to be £10 or $10 at the end of the week, whatever, give it to them. Medication is critical for teenagers because their hormones are going bonkers anyway. Add ADHD into it, they're double bonkers, and their risk-taking, thrill-seeking, impulsivity, and not thinking of the consequences is off the scale. So you need to medicate teenagers, whatever it takes. I've known parents who said, well, I shouldn't really slip it into a cereal without him knowing, should I? I'm like, yes. If that's the only way you're going to get it into him, yes, because it protects them. It's all about protecting teenagers because far too early it can go wrong for them. So, you don't want a low self-esteem 13-year-old who's been arrested 30 times already. You don't want that. And the way not to have that is to medicate, whether it's non-stimulants, stimulants, even if it's some of the very healthy ways of medicating. So let's say you've got a child who genuinely can't take medication because they've got other medical conditions and they can't take medication. Get straight onto Amazon and buy an ice bath and make them sit in that ice bath for 5 minutes every morning, because that is known to do the same for your brain as ADHD medication.
Oh, interesting.
Yes, an ice bath. Yeah, they're 60, 70 pounds on Amazon. They can't be very much. Yeah, I'm sure you've got them just as we are. Buy one of those, or if you can't afford that, get them to stand under a cold shower for 5 minutes. It's going to be vile, but at first, but they will get used to it. And that 5 minutes of cold water in the morning supposedly gives you the same amount of dopamine for the rest of the day and protects you like an ADHD medication. So if you really have got a child for whatever reason can't take the meds, Google alternatives. There are some brilliant supplements that work very, very well for ADHD as well. So don't do nothing. That's where it goes wrong. Do something. And if you can't get them on meds, definitely get them in with an ADHD coach or a counselor. They need to understand that their brain is impulsive. It is compulsive. So when they've done something once, let's say they've nicked something off a building site and they flogged it for $50, their brain is going to go and do that again because that worked brilliantly. So the compulsivity comes into it as well. So they do a naughty thing, they get away with it, earn some money, going to do it again. They're going to do it again until they get caught.
Yeah.
So if you can't medicate them, do some of the, the natural ways of managing your ADHD. And I strongly recommend booking in with an ADHD coach, because they need to understand the way their brain works. Once they understand, oh, I am more partial to being impulsive, I've got to stop and think, or I am more prone to being, and not thinking of the consequences, I've got to stop. I did this with a lot of my clients. I always used to get them to think of the worst case scenario. And one of them, him and a friend put a bucket of water on the door, and somebody was going to walk through the door and the water was going to fall on them. Suddenly, the one that I'd had in therapy for 18 months, he went, no, take it down. And the other boy said, why? And he said, because the person who walks through the door might have a bad heart. He might have a heart attack and die, and we'll get done for murder. Now, that was my most extreme, but that's what I used to put into their brains. Think of the worst case scenario, because it could happen.
Yeah.
It could happen, and that one I'd had for 18 months. And he did actually go, no, take that bucket down, because he suddenly realized that worst case scenario, he's going to be done for attempted murder or something. And that's how you have to be with the kids who aren't medicated. You have to get them to think, what's the worst thing that could happen here? Because they don't naturally think of it. So you have to help them think of it.
Okay. Great advice, Sarah. Thank you for being here.
It works. That's the one thing I do promise you. It works.
Yeah. No, I agree. Yeah. Well, you've said so much today. It's like really been a delight to talk to you.
Pleasure. Thank you for letting me have my rant. I love it.
I love it. It was great. It was great.
Okay. Total pleasure. Thanks for having me.